to map stuff. Let's do the side-by-side thing here and here. I think the first thing I want to do is make this centered on St. Pete more. So let's go get one of those latitude and longitudes and set it as our viewport center. So let's get this latitude and let's get this longitude. See what that does. That's better, but let's make the zoom like 8. 18. Way too much. 12. That's better. And then I did see somewhere where there is a way to set the offset for the map. So I'll post a link to the documentation, but it's just, if you Google search the name of the project and you find the site, here's the documentation. But if you look at the marker, it does have an offset left, offset top. So on our marker, I think what we can do is we can do an offset top to be 64 pixels. It's a number, 64 pixels. Let's see what that does. Does that get us any better so that it's pointing at the top of the building? That's better, right? Although, no, it's on central, so it should be the other way. So maybe we need negative 64 pixels.
That looks like it.
Yeah, that's better. And then we probably need like negative half the size of this, or yeah, probably negative half the size of the image. So let's see how big this image is. Oh, you know what? It's half of 32. Because, oh, sorry, it's half of 64. Offset left, negative 32. Hopefully this will put it right on top of Casita Taqueria. Yep, there we go. So we can set an offset. So let's add the part where we can click on one of these and get some information about them. So if we look at their example, they have a function. Make this a little bigger so we can read it. They have a function that just says render a pop-up. So let's add inside of here, along with the image, this dot render, let's take off the render pop-up. Let's add a method, render pop-up. Their render pop-up right here, let's just add this for now, the pop-up. We're just going to return this pop-up. And you notice that they're rendering this latitude and longitude from this pop-up info. Pop-up info comes from the state. So we're going to add another state. And we're going to start out as null. And what we'll say here in render pop-up is if this dot state dot pop-up info return. Actually, if not if we don't have pop-up information, we're just going to return. So that means that eventually none of this is going to render. So let's get the pop-up in here as well. Let's import pop-up as well.
Do you have an underscore before render pop-up?
No, I decided to call mine just render pop-up without the underscore. They're using the underscore to mean private, and I'm meaning it to be, I'm referring that just for handler functions. So now we need, it's not state dot pop-up info. Oh, and now what we can do now is we can make this a little simpler. Right, we can take pop-up info from the state and say if we don't have any pop-up info, return. Otherwise, we're going to render this. You'll notice that when the pop-up is closed, in their example, when this pop-up is closed, what they're doing is they're setting pop-up info back to null. So it essentially turns off the pop-up. So if there's pop-up info in the state, then we get this pop-up rendering, and if not, we don't. Let's have this just render a div whose color, whose, let's see, style is color red. Hello. And then we'll come along and we'll build a fancier pop-up. So, right, we don't have anything showing because we don't have this pop-up, because we don't have any latitude and longitude. So you'll notice also for their, where is it? For a marker, they have an on-click on the city pin. For us, that's the image. So let's add an on-click for our image that calls a function. Let's go, oops. And what it's going to have is this.setState pop-up info is going to be the location. They're setting it to the city. We're going to set the pop-up info to be the current location. That will put something in our pop-up info. What happened here? We got an error. Something errored. What happened? Oh, it doesn't like style. So let's get rid of the style thing. Let's just have it be a div that says hello. Fine. Uh-oh. What happened to our image?
I did see like 404 in your console.
What's that?
It said something about 404 in your console.
Yeah. Maybe we've got to download. Maybe we're finally at the point where we have to download this image. They're tired of us downloading it, so let's just download it. So let's go into source, and let's just download this image, and rename it pin.png. And up here, we'll import pin from pin.png. And then way down here instead of this source, we'll say source is pin. So all we're doing is downloading the image, importing it, and then keeping it inside our own app. Fine. So that's interesting that we're getting 3 of them. So you see I clicked on this pin and we got 3 pop-ups.
Those empty offset as well.
No.
His locations are.
Oh, because the render pop-up is inside of the marker. I don't want that inside of the map. I want that up here. Right, I was getting the render pop-up for every single location. Right, now I'm only getting the hello for the location that I click on. Right, so in the pop-up, rather than render hello, let's render a div with some p tags. A paragraph that has the pop-up info dot company name, and then a p tag that has the pop-up info, because this is all the stuff that comes from the location, so we should have the address, and we should also have of the hours, right? It's all the things that we should have.
Curly breaks on hours.
I am, thank you. Y'all are getting good at I spying the errors. Right, Suncoast Tacos, Casita. Kind of feels like a Google map, huh? Casita. Oh, looks like there's a Z order challenge, but that's a thing we can fix later. Let's go find the one that's in Washington, D.C. There it is. Right?
So, I'm sorry, how did the pop-up get that information?
Gotcha. So if we look down here, when the image, that's the content of our marker, is clicked, we're calling a little function right in line. Right? I can pull this out to a function if that helps a little bit more. Let's call this click marker. There's a function that takes an event. Let's move it out to a function, because we really haven't done that style before. And then down here, we'll just say this dot click marker. Right. So when a marker is clicked, really the image inside of it is clicked. What we're going to do is call this click marker function. And what it's going to do is it's going to change the state. Oh, but we also need the location. We need to pass. That's why they're doing it in line. That's why they're doing it in line. Let me go back to the other way. Let me undo. Let me explain it first, and then we can talk about changing it. Never mind. So when this image is clicked, we're going to call a function that says, let's set the state for pop-up info to be whatever's contained inside of the current location. Well, what's location? It's whatever the current location as we go through our this.props.location. So we're going through our array of all of our locations, making these little markers. The markers contain an image. When that image inside of this marker is clicked, it knows which location object is associated to this marker, right? It knows this location because it's inside of this map loop. Right? This props locations, map location. I can pull out the location ID and the longitude and the latitude. But when I click on the image, I'm going to say the pop-up info is that whole location object. Right? Let's look at it in React Tools. Let's bring up React Tools.
So just to clarify, you created a variable called pin, which was the imported PNG image, and you set that to the source of the
Right,
image.
just like we've been doing images
Okay.
so far. So here's our app. Here's our map. Let's look what my viewport is. Here's my viewport, right? You'll notice that as I drag the map, what's happening to the latitude and longitude, right? It's changing. As I zoom, right? The zoom is changing. 10.5, 9.5. This is probably a good way to like set your viewport, like do this and figure out what these values are. That's smart, right? Right. Center it where you want and zoom it in and out until you get it kind of perfect, and then copy the zoom and the latitude and longitude. That would have been smart. We also look at the pop-up info, right? It's null. So if pop-up info in the state is null, what happens when render pop-up is called? If there's no pop-up info in our state, we just return. And that's rendered every single time we call the main render. Inside of the map, we're calling this.render pop-up, right? We're going to generate the navigation control and the pop-up if it's there, and then all the locations. So as long as pop-up is null, we won't get any pop-up, right? Now I can come here into the state and change this, but what happens is every time I click on one of these images, I'm going to copy, reference whatever this location object is as pop-up info. So watch as I click on this one. Pop-up info changed to this location object, object ID 1. When I click on the close for the pop-up, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, set the state of the pop-up info to null. As soon as I click this little X, all we're doing is making pop-up info to null. The whole component repaints. Pop-up info was null, so we don't stick the pop-up in the page. If I click on this one, this location is the one with ID 2. So when this render pop-up happens, there is information in the pop-up info state. Right? We pull that out into a little variable called pop-up info, and we use its latitude and longitude, company name, address, hours. That's what fills the little box, right? So if this is breweries, right, this would be all the brewery information that we'd be sticking in here, right? Our location just has company name, address, and hours in it. You can imagine if we had the photo, right? We could put the photo inside of here. Right? Potentially, you could even use the photo as the pin marker, right? Because that's just an image as well.
I was thinking for mine, on click, I would change the information displayed below the map.
Like
So
below
if
the
you
map?
selected the bar, it would just go to that bar's view.
Cool. Let's do that. Let's see how that would work. Let's let me commit this before we go any further, right?
Is pop-up built in React, or is that
It's a part of the map tool.
map tool?
Yeah, it comes from the map. So you see where we imported it up here? We imported pop-up from React Map.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the map, the marker, the pop-up, and the navigation control all come from the React Map library. So adds clicking of markers. Cool. Let's do what, I think that's a good one. Let's do what Kenny was suggesting. So what we want to have happen is when we click on one of these, we want the information about the location to be displayed somewhere else on the page. Maybe we don't even want the pop-up. Maybe we'll do both. So here's what we're going to do. Let's have, actually, let me put that UL back in. Let's add underneath the map a P tag here. Let's get rid of the UL. Right? And what we want is, we want this P tag to only show if there's a location. Let's make another state called selected location. What we want is, we want this P tag to show if there's a selected location and for it not to render if there isn't. So I'm going to make a little function called render selected location. And it's going to say if there isn't, oh my goodness. If there isn't, if not, this dot state dot selected location, return. Otherwise, let's return this p tag. And down here, let's call this dot render selected location. And this location is now going to be this dot state dot selected location. And this is going to be this dot state dot selected location. And this is going to be this dot state dot selected location. I need more space temporarily. I wish there was like a hotkey to do that. Because what I want to render is the selected location's address and the selected location's hours. And the selected location's rating. Now let's not do the latitude and longitude. Let's just do these. And then let's change it so this is a div. And these are all wrapped in p tags. And then there's an error here. This dot. Oh, and this needs to go inside of here. Okay, let's see if we get this going. Cool. So we don't have any selected location when this renders. We can fix that by saying something like, what if we just made the selected location response data location 0? And if we just make the selected location the first location, hey, we get Suncoast Tacos. And if we were to make the selected location the second location, we get Casita. Right? Whatever's inside of selected location is what's going to render inside of this space underneath the map. Right? It doesn't make sense to do this. I'm just trying to test if this works. So if I can somehow change the selected location on and off, I can make something pop up down at the bottom of this. It's going to depend on whether or not my app has a selected location. So what I need now is a function called, I don't know, let's call it set selected location. It's a function that's going to take a location, and it's going to call this dot set state selected location to that location. So this function takes whatever I give it as a location and it makes it the state's selected location. And as soon as that exists, that will paint at the bottom. Well, what if I pass that to my on-click location attribute property of my location map? Right? So I'm telling my location map, hey, when you click on a location, let's call it on-click marker. When you click on a marker, right, I want you to set the location. So now, in my map, when this is clicked, I want to do two things. I want to call this dot props dot on click marker, and I want to pass it the location, and I want to join this and add this. You know what? It's not going to let me do two things in here. So I got to do this on one line and join it with a semicolon. Still not letting me do that. What's it complaining about? On click. Oh, I'm missing a. There we go. Syntax error. So when this image is clicked, I want to call the function on-click marker that I got from my properties and pass it the location, right? Essentially calling this function up here, back in my app, all the way back to React where you pass functions down and send it back, right? We could do this with mobx. You can do this with redux. Here I'm just passing a function down. So now as soon as I click on this marker, Suncoast Tacos, and as soon as I click on this, uh-oh, it didn't go away. Why? Because in the part of the system here that says on close, I need to also call this.props.onClickMarker and pass it a null. Oops. Doing a lot of fat fingering today. Right, when it's closed, we're going to set our state to null and tell onClickMarker the location is null. So when I click on this marker, I get Suncoast Tacos, and when I close it, it goes away. Click on this, Suncoast Tacos, and when I close it, it goes away. Click here, Casita, close it, it goes away. Right? So I'm passing down a function from the parent that gets a copy of that location when it's clicked. The app says, hey, all I need to do is when I'm called, remember that location is my selected location. And if render selected location has a state for that, render it. And if it doesn't, then don't. Right? I could turn off the pop-up if I comment out this line down here. Then what I think what I'll get is clicking on markers without the pop-up, but I'll still get the thing that's selected down there, right? If I wanted to get fancier, I could do something like, hey, if this location is the current location, render a different marker, right? Maybe I turn the marker blue, right? And I would do that by just rendering a different image here, right? A different pin, right? If the currently selected location is my location, I could change the marker, right? Because it's just determining which which image to do by that variable pin. You could make that dynamic too. At this point, we just use what data we have to determine what we want to render, right? And the rest of this is just formatting. Cool. I think the other thing we said we were going to do is we were going to talk about how do you find data from our database near something. So let's do this. Let's go into Rails console. And let's look at all our locations. So we have some locations that are near St. Pete, and we have some locations that are far away. Right? We've got one location that's in DC. If we go back to the geocoder gem, one of the things that it says it adds is some helpers for Rails. Aha! It says it's added a near function to the thing that we said is geocoded. In their case, venues. In our case, locations. So we could say, show me all the locations that are near Tampa, Florida. Just 3 of them. Show me all the locations that are near. There are none, but I think what we can add is a distance of how many miles. How many miles it is to DC? Right? Look at the crazy query that it generated. Look at that. Give me all the locations and this thing, sines and cosines, right? This is not driving distance. This is as the crow flies distances, right? It's just looking at the 2 locations, right, with the great circle distance around the surface of the Earth, right? So if you just want to know, hey, show me all the people that are near, that are kind of near St. Petersburg, I don't know, within like 10 miles, right? It's those. Right. So what if we only wanted St. Pete locations in our map, right? In our locations controller, instead of saying location all, let's just take all the ones that are near St. Petersburg, Florida. Now when we reload our map, and we zoom out, right, the one that's in DC is gone. Right? So you could imagine that if we had some state that tracked like an input box, right, we could use that to filter this index and only find locations near something that we typed in. Any question?
So could we do, near where our computer is located?
Cool. Very interesting question. So if we want to know where we are, let's look at our browser, what our browser can give us for geolocation. Right? Our browser can ask where our location is, right? We can get the current position, right? This code here, navigator geolocation get current position, takes a callback function that can do something with this information. Let's take this code from MDN. Let's add in our app, let's add another bit of state. User location. Let's make that null at the start.
You need something like a geocoder in order to use that.
We do not.
You don't?
This is purely from the browser. So when the component mounts, we're going to ask navigator, which is a built-in kind of like document, its geolocation to get the current position. And when you're done, I want you to call me back, and this is what we're going to do. This.setState user location is an object with a latitude that's going to be position.coords.latitude, and longitude is going to be position.coords.longitude. So we're going to ask the browser to allow the user to choose to share its location with us. When they do, we will get a position variable. Set the user location in state to where the user is. So now if we look at our client, look what it's asking me. Localhost wants to know where you are, right? You've all seen this when you go to sites, right? Even when you don't want. What's happening is they're calling navigator.geolocation get current position, right? And if I say allow, what we should see now in React, if I go to my app, hey, look, there's my user location, a latitude and a longitude. Sweet. What if we use that in our API locations? What if we passed here to our locations, what if we passed, can we pass it this way? Let's do this. That's not a const. Let's make a URL to be API locations. And if we have a state user location, let's take the URL and add a question mark, latitude equals, oops, so we got to make this a dynamic string because we're going to interpolate here in a second. This.state.userLocation.latitude and longitude is this.state.userLocation.longitude. And then we'll change this just to say URL.
You need to close the.
URL.
Oh, thank you. Right, so we'll make a URL that's API locations. And then if we have a user location, we'll add that to the URL, right? If we have a user location, make the URL, the old URL plus question mark, right? Going way back to the first days we did APIs, we can add params to the end of our API request, make the latitude the user location's latitude, and make the longitude the user's location longitude. Now if we look at Rails, where's our Rails terminal? Let's see. It's still just asking us for API locations. So what we need to do is when this changes, we need to update this. When the state changes, we need to update this. So what we need to do now is something like this. What do we want to do? We want to do this. We want to make the URL also be state. API locations. This gets a little more complicated. Let's see if we can figure this out. So if we make the state the URL there, then what we want to do is when this changes, we also want to change the URL. And the URL is just going to be API locations followed by this stuff. Followed by this. Oops. Followed by the latitude and this dot state dot user location. Sorry, here it's going to be position chords. Position chords latitude, and this is going to be position dot chords dot longitude. So we'll change the URL as well, and then this can just be this dot state dot URL. Let's see if that works. Okay, so now the URL is also part of state. And when we change the position, we'll update this URL. Now what we need to do is one last thing. We also can get a callback function. When it's done, we want to refresh the data. So let's make a new function, get locations, that we can call. So get locations is going to be a function, and all it's going to do is this work right here. Right? It's just going to call Axios and get the URL. And then here what we'll do is we'll just call this dot get locations. So that was a lot, right? We decided that the URL is now dynamic. When we get back the current position of the user, we are going to set the location and the URL. So we're going to store the user location, and we're going to change the URL for our API to be API locations, but also give it the latitude and the longitude that we just got from that position. When that's done, we will get the locations again. Right? But in the meanwhile, we'll just get all the locations we have. So what we should see now when we load our app is two requests to the API. One that happens when the page loads, and one that happens once it figures out where we are. No, we just got the one. Oh, there we go. There's the second one. So here's the first one. Locations, here's the second. Aha! API locations, and now we have a latitude and longitude. Right? So what we'd like to have happen is only show the markers near where we are. So now if we look at our controller, right, here's latitude and longitude, near a latitude and longitude. So back in our locations controller, what we can say is if params latitude exists and params longitude exists, all the locations is not just location all, right? It's locations near an array of params latitude and params longitude. Right, and if this makes it better for you, we'll put it on multiple lines. I'm gonna do this one. Let's make a local variable. Latitude is params latitude, and longitude is params longitude. And this just becomes simpler. If latitude exists and if longitude exists, right? If latitude and longitude doesn't exist, we'll just get all of them. So now in the controller, we're looking to say, did they pass us a latitude and longitude? And if they did, only show me the ones near there. Otherwise, show them all to me. So now in the client, you need to refresh this because it doesn't refresh the client when the backend changes. The one in DC should be gone. And it is. Let's go into the app and set the zoom so we can see it happen. What's our zoom right now?
12.5, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm gonna look in the. I want to look in the app though. What's our live zoom? So let's go and look at our zoom right now, and our zoom is 2.5. So let's go find our zoom. That's down here. Nope, that's in the map. And let's make our zoom temporarily 2.5. So I think what we'll see when we save this is we'll see DC being shown. And then go away. Maybe it's too quick. Yep, there it is. Do you see it real fast? Even before like the tiles could load in, it fetched all the locations, then it realized where we were, and then it did another query to not show it.
So you only have to ask for, it'll only ask for permission once.
Yes.
For the location.
And we'll cache it. Now, if we didn't want to do that first render, what we could do is in our app, we could just not do this, right? If we turn that off, then we get nothing until the map, until it figures out where we live, right? But if someone says no, then no taco places load, right? So you can always say like, hey, I can't show you any taco places unless you tell me, you gotta give me permission. I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no. Just depends on what you want, right? So if we want them when we start, we do this and we get all of them. And then when we find out where the user lives, it reloads and only gives us those, right? So, you know, all these kinds of things we can start doing once we have this basics done, right?
So if we changed the location on the map, like we were dragging the map, it could expand.
Yes.
Beyond
Mm-hmm. Yes, because what you would then do is as the map is moving, you would change this latitude and longitude in the API, that every time you move the map, it could requery and just show me only the ones near there. That's what a lot of sites do where there are millions of results, right? It only does a search in the viewport area. And every time you move, you can see it almost like research, right? Like Google works that way, like you're searching for restaurants and you drag the menu and it kind of re-searches just for restaurants in that area. Same kind of thing. What we'd have to do then is in our location map, in the function that says update viewport, we'd have to send this viewport back up to the parent so it could reload all the locations and send them back to us, right? We'd have to have the same thing here, like this dot props dot, hey app, our viewport moved. Hey, here's the new viewport. The app would wake up, see the new viewport, send another request, which would fetch more locations, which would send them back to the map. This is like the tricky thing about React, where you have like data flowing in multiple directions, but it does make it relatively straightforward to keep adding more features as long as you can kind of make the information flow work. So yes, we could limit the taco search to just what's physically on the map, because we know the viewport and we know how wide it is, right? We could just say, hey, just look for things within however many miles this is from the center of the map, which would be kind of cool. Right? If we put the ULs back in when we were listing all of the taco places, we would see all 4 of them show up and then one of them go away when we found out what our location is. We could put a special marker on the map of where we are, right? Let's see if we can do that. How are we doing on time? Well, we got like 8 minutes before 4 o'clock comes, which is fine. Let's see if we can also pass down the user location. So to the map, let's also pass down the user location as this.state.user location. Let's pass the map down. Cool. And then in location map, let's put this back to 12.5. Cool. And then here, what we'll say is, where is the locations? Let's say this dot render user marker. Let's grab a marker example. And then in render user marker, that's going to be a function that's going to return a marker. We don't need a key here. This will become this.props.userLocation.longitude and this.props.userLocation.latitude. And then we don't need any on clicks because we don't want it to do anything when you click on the user one. But we need to make sure that if there isn't a this.props.userLocation, let's return. Right? If there isn't any user location, we will bounce. Hey. And I think one of these is where we are. This guy. Let's go get a different pin. This blue one. Let's download that one. Oops, nope, that was my Rails server. Let's get this one, and let's rename it userpin.png. Back in our location map, let's import the user pin from userpin.png.
You saved it as user PNG.
I did. User pin.png. User ping to user pin.png. Awesome. Cool. Now, when we render the user marker, this will be user pin. And our client I wonder why it's a different size, even though we scaled the width. Maybe.
Because there was a border, like empty space for the red one.
Oh, you think so? Okay, that could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even this is. That's weird. Because it's. Huh. Oh, I think what we have to do is figure out. This has got a different offset. Right, yeah, we got to figure out is. I think we got the offset this way, but the offset this way is, the top is not right. I think this makes sense. The offset left, because we set the width, makes sense, half of 64. I think we lucked out with this offset. I think I was assuming square, but it isn't. So I think for a cheat, let's just make it square. It's gonna look stupid, but let's see if that makes it accurate to where we are. Yeah. That's accurate to where we are on the corner of Central and 22nd. So now we're showing where the user is. I think, in fact, is there a way to fake our geolocation? I think there's a way inside of here to fake our geolocation. More tools, sensors. More tools, sensors. Oh, look at that. They got like built-in ones. Let's go to San Francisco. And then reload the page. Why is my network so crappy? Here's my pin in San Francisco. Let's see. There I am. So that pin is accurate to where my browser is telling me I am. I feel like my network is. I've got the. Do I have a slowdown? Nope. It's full speed, right? And if we turn this off, right, we could do a custom location, right? So if you wanted to like test Tampa or to somewhere else, let's put it back to no override and reload this. There we are. Cool. What did we do here? Let's commit this work. In this one, we added the user location. Adds the user location. Searches for taco locations only near the user. Shows the user location on the map. Right. Don't know if that's going to be useful for any of y'all, but that's how you would do it. Was there something else I said I was going to talk about this afternoon?
The search.
We did the search. That's the near.
Oh, that was the meter.
That's near, right? So if you wanted to, like, we could add an input box up here, and when they pressed enter, we could send a different API request. Right? Maybe. So maybe if you had kind of like, remember weather search, we typed in the name of a city. Maybe it goes to a different index page that takes the name and does a near, not a latitude and a longitude, but near the name. Right, so show me all the taco locations near New York City, right? And that would go to a different route in our backend and would take the parameter of the name of the city and pass that to near and show us all the locations near that and render the same JSON, right? Right, we'd add an input here with a state management and, you know, an on enter or submit, Axios, get a search, pull the name out, locations near that name, render all the locations. That's how one might do a search. There is a, I think you asked me, Dylan, what about clicking on the map? So there is a click. So on the map itself, there is an on click. Interactive options, transitions, on click. There's an on click function for the map. So what you would do is, nope, I don't want to print. On your location map, on the map itself, we would say on click is this dot user clicked. Let's make a function called user clicked. What it's going to do is it's going to receive a pointer event. So it's going to get this event, and we can just console.log. Let's do this. The user clicked at event.
You need to handle on your function.
What's that?
You need to handle on your function.
Yes. User clicked. So hopefully now what we'll get is the latitude and longitude where the user clicked, amongst other things here in the console. Go away, clear so we can see. Right, and there's the latitude and longitude where they clicked. The user clicked here, and there's the latitude and longitude. So let's just log that.
Is that just giving us every piece of information that comes along with the map?
Yeah, it's everything along with that event. All we really care about is where they clicked. Right? So based on that, right, maybe what we do is something weird like this dot set state. Was it user location? User location is latitude event.long lat 0 because it's the first element. This I'm doing a silly thing just to show you could have your app react to it. All right, let's just move the user location around when they click. Oh, except user location is not a state. Let's move the viewport. This dot viewport dot latitude. Let's move the viewport. Latitude, longitude, and zoom. Let's keep the zoom 12.5. Right. This is like a dumb example, but you could still use this to send to the API. Right. Did it move? I screwed something up. Anyway, that's dumb. I don't want to spend more time on it. You could use that latitude and longitude to send a request to your API, right? Or you could draw a marker, right? Maybe in addition to this, we have a click marker, right? Have another marker that shows up wherever the user clicked, right? Kind of like for yours, when they're going to click on the map, you're going to want to show a pin with a button that says add an album here, right? That's what you would do when that on click happens, is you would add a marker with a pop-up. It says add an album, or add a new brewery, or add a new trip, something like that. But all we know now is that we can find that latitude and longitude when the user clicks. The rest is setting state and rendering the right thing when it shows up. We should still be able to click on these. Right. So, more work to do to make it more full-featured, but the core elements of dealing with a map are there. Right? You could probably start with a lot of this existing location map implementation. Right? because there's nothing in here that's taco specific, except for this stuff right here, right? And we could even pull this out of this component and make that more generic. But if you have a mapping thing, you could start with this as your baseline and add more, right? But as you know, it's 120 lines of something, of which some of it is even like, you know, multi-lines for one component. That's not too bad for having all this interactivity right here in our map. It's pretty cool. More questions on the mapping or searching or distance stuff? No? Cool.
If you wanted the map to be a rectangle, if you change the
Mhm.
height, would that work the map or just
No.
part of it off?
Let's see, where did we end up doing that?
It's at the top, I
I
think.
think it's in our CSS. Where is it? I think we ended up doing it in our CSS. Client, index CSS, I think it's here. Let's do the width. Let's make the width 100% of the view width. Let's make the height 100% of the view height, just for giggles. Right, and then let's get out of full screen mode. Right. Right. I don't know if that's what we want to really do, but there you go. Right. So it's just going to respond to whatever we make this. And if we make the width 900, make the width 800 pixels wide, and the height 100 pixels tall, right? That's probably not quite right, but you get it. Right. We can make it 100% of the width and 300 pixels tall. Right, this is all just based on whatever your design says it should be. That's kind of up to you.